Hi, my name is Lyric, and today we're going to be reacting to why Tim Duncan was one of the best ever Greatest Peaks episode 12. So, this is part of a 3-part series I'm doing on Duncan, and we're going to do a 3-part series like this on every one of the 8 players that is in the Making the Case series of making the case on why they're the greatest players of all time. So, the first one that came out was Tim Duncan, so we're doing a 3-part series looking into Tim Duncan. I released the first episode yesterday, which was looking at the highlights of Tim Duncan's best season, his 2003 season. It was crazy. And now today we're doing the second part, which is reacting to why Tim Duncan was one of the best ever. Greatest Peaks, episode 12. I've seen some videos by Thinking Basketball, whose videos by. I know that he just really does the in-depth analysis. I've never seen any videos of this series, though, but judging by the title, I assume it's just a detailed look at the peak of some of the greatest players of all time. You're seeing just how good they were at their peak. And Tim Duncan was definitely one of the best ever at his peak, so this is definitely going to be good. Next, we're going to be looking at making the case of Tim Duncan and making the case on how he's the greatest player of all time, so stay tuned for that. But let's look at some of this deep analysis on Tim Duncan's game on the Greatest Peaks series. I don't think I have to watch this in order, so I'm starting at episode 12. So, yeah, let's begin. Make sure to like and subscribe, and let's go.
In this series, we've seen 2 types of big men. The first anchored the defense while playing a kind of co-pilot role on offense. The second dominated with their team's attack orbiting around their incredible scoring. Which brings us to the final great big man in this series.
Tim Duncan.
Was Tim Duncan more of an offensive centerpiece? Or did his crafty low-post scoring game and suffocating interior defense make him the very best of the two-way big men?
Maybe, man, maybe. Let's go.
Greatness is all about. Where's Larry Bird in all this?
Has it blocked by Elijah Wan.
Michael Jordan saves the day.
This series tackles one question. Who was the best at his best? We start at the ABA merger and go through the best multi-year stretches, examining the legends who provided the most on-court impact. These are the greatest peaks.
Let's go, man. Tim Duncan, 2003.
Timmy, we hit
season we
you
reacted to
phrases,
in highlights.
Almost. This the worst right here. Nice try.
Duncan is easily the best modern defender never to win Defensive Player of the Year. His teammate Bruce Bowen is actually the only player with a larger share of votes over the years to never claim the award. And like great defensive centers before him, Tim's value comes from protecting the most important real estate in the game, the space right in front of the hoop.
Right.
I've never seen any public record of his actual wingspan, but Duncan was long. He was around 7 feet without shoes and had the arms of a weeping willow tree. This is one of the reasons he blocked so many shots out of a shooter's hand. He had great feel and timing when targeting attempts like this. Kenyon Martin is auditioning for the role of Charles Smith here until Kevin Willis ruins it with a foul. And here Devin George is overcome with the wild idea to baptize Duncan. And notice Timmy used that off arm again to slow down George and feel out the block.
Timmy.
This time it's Rob Ory trying him, and Duncan takes a big step and again uses his off arm to brace against him, and that swimmer's reach can do the rest. His strength helps this style of shot contesting because he doesn't need to load up to jump. He plows through his man here and probably catches Kobe by surprise. And the big fundamental likely caught plenty of shooters off guard because he kept his hands down when he moved, then typically brought them up when jumping like this, so he was always under control when sliding over to help in the paint.
Really smart player.
This steady body control allowed him to challenge threats in the lane and then immediately recover into a second challenge, which is one of the perks of a more floor-bound approach because he never jumped himself out of a play. Again, you'll see his hands are down, ready to jump, but he stays locked and loaded, and his windmill arms meant he could swivel from one threat to the next because his rim protection was less about leaping and more about timing and that ant-like standing reach. Duncan's block percentage during the playoffs in these seasons wasn't too far from the all-time greats, although his numbers were suppressed slightly by playing next to another center. When the Spurs went Twin Towers, there was about a 15% reduction in his block rate. Of course, keeping his hands down and not out meant he rarely deflected passes, and that made it a touch easier to slip them around him. Another key to Duncan's paint defense was his positioning. He'd sag into the lane an extra step or two, so he didn't have to go far to meet penetrators. Again, note the body control to stay down, and he barely needs to jump to swat it.
Yeah.
He could stand one step into the lane using the classic toe tapping technique to avoid 3 seconds, and that cut down the distance to help off the weak side. Here he slaps his hips in disagreement, a rare move in a deep bag of protestations, some of which were more animated, and some of which were more subtle performance art. Although, my personal favorite is the incredulous stare.
If you make Tim Duncan mad, you know it's over. If you make Tim Duncan mad, just stop. You know you've really done wrong.
Speaking of reactions, Duncans weren't always lightning quick. George is free here before he goes, but he's so well positioned it takes one step to protect the rim, and there was usually a tiny delay before he started sliding, and the third time was not the charm for Devin. TD usually arrived on time, but sometimes that minor delay in reaction speed led to a bucket, but he also didn't need nanosecond processing because he was such a big presence, and a quick step toward the ball handler heavily influenced drives. He was even long enough to throw off floaters from skilled guards. In general, Duncan was aware of most threats. After some creative screening, he slides toward the action here, then realizes he needs to help on the roll man, and that is a tough make. Here's another storm of ball screens by the offense, and he plugs up the first roller, realizes he needs to recover to the second screen, and smothers the ball handler in a great team sequence.
Oh my god. Hold up, get an ad. I need to talk more. I'm not finding more. I'm not finding another analysis I can add. The videos, the film of videos, a lot of analysis like this is I can't add more than one analysis because they're adding so much analysis already. But yeah, Tim Duncan might be top 10 defender ever, you know. Actually, he definitely is. That's not even a debate. Top 5, maybe.
He was part of a unit that choked off opponents at the rim, holding them well below league average on these high-value attempts. The Spurs were most successful with 2 centers out there, but even with Duncan as the lone middleman, they defended the paint incredibly well, and in general thrived behind a defensively oriented roster. This is also where Greg Popovich established himself as an all-time coach, throwing in a zone every once in a while to throw off opponents, and instilling airtight schemes. The Spurs switch this pick and roll because Amari Stoudemire is mismatched with a wing, then Duncan can pick up Amari behind the play, and Manu Ginobili is down in a driving gap, and the whole thing's a clinic. The consistent implementation of these principles was impressive. A big shows on the pick and roll here, which means the other big in the paint slides to cover the roller, and wings were always prioritizing paint help. Bruce Bowen is sealing inside Duncan's man, and then the rotations quickly follow, and it leads to a low percentage shot. With Ginobili and Tony Parker yet to enter their primes, that Spurs roster was lighter on offensive parts, and instead featured defensive studs like Bowen and an aging Admiral, who had his moments in spurts. All of this made the Spurs a defensive dynasty, posting some of the best multi-year stretches of regular season and playoff defense in league history. San Antonio's defense was practically elite without Duncan, holding teams nearly 4 points below league average from 2001 to 2004 with him on the bench. With Duncan protecting the paint as an anchor, the Spurs became an all-time defense, and he had the ability to plug up breakdowns with fantastic saves like this. However, he did have some blind spots in his vision, meaning he couldn't always locate the ball instantly or anticipate danger at all times. He just completely misses this slip play that Utah liked to bust out on occasion. And he could have a little tunnel vision while on the move. This cut isn't really going anywhere, but he zones out and misses the back door. And this is almost identical to a play from last episode, where Robinson helps in front of Duncan, only Tim doesn't slide over to cover Robinson's man until it's too late, and there's no heroic save. Duncan played the Spurs pick and roll scheme reasonably well, showing then recovering to his man, but he was particularly effective sagging off the dribbler and then using his length to bother pull-up jumpers. Even far out on the perimeter, his never-ending arms caught shooters off guard. And since he was mobile enough to venture out a bit and use that size to
very
keep
versatile
ball handlers
defender,
at bay,
while
he
also
was
being
well-suited
mainly a
for
best
sagging, dropping coverages
defenders
against pick and rolls. His lateral movement wasn't really a strength, and he was slightly vulnerable on the outside to quickness. On this play, he's supposed to slow down the ball, but the sharp change of direction leaves him in Kobe's wake, and that whole Twin Towers thing was so effective back then. Now, while Duncan's mobility wasn't great, he was slow to decelerate, for instance, he wasn't a liability moving around the floor during that era.
Damn it,
While he
Dirk.
could be beaten by quicker players when guarding the ball, it was rare for big men at the time to face up on the perimeter and attack him with speed off the bounce. If anything, the slower, more interior-based game amplified some of TD's man defense, where his length could really bother opponents who couldn't stretch him to the outside. He was also really strong enough not to be completely manhandled by Shaq himself. Of course, that didn't work every possession.
Great strength.
I'm convinced flopping was the only way to actually slow down O'Neal. So, just like we've seen from most of the big men in this series, Duncan's defense was an enormous value add. The bigger question, though, is just how valuable was an offense run through Tim Duncan.
Tim Duncan.
Tim Duncan.
The Wicked
I love
Greatness is
that.
back at Foot Locker. No way.
No way.
That's insane.
I'm so excited.
I'm bouncing off the wall.
Never gets this excited.
I can't contain myself. I just knocked over a plant, celebrating.
In contrast to the guard-like approach we saw last episode from Kevin Garnett, Duncan's offensive game was rooted deep in the paint like a traditional center. Unlike old-school centers, he was skilled enough to attack from the perimeter. He could face and drive all the way to the hole.
Nice.
But wherever he started, Duncan was often grinding closer to the basket with his strength. Because he was a contemporary of Shaq,
very underrated
people talked
strength.
about just how strong Timmy was, but he often worked for deeper position and powered into his points.
A lot more of a power
At
play.
260 pounds, he could hold this low position on the block and then swim into a move with force. Notice how he dislodges his defender with his shoulder to create space for the shot. And he would lead with his arms on these little half hooks and turning push shots. Watch closely. He swivels into Ori and throws his arm straight up through Ori's left arm into the release. This takes great hand strength and turns his off arm into a shield. Again, backing down closer, and even though his man is sitting on the shot, he flares that left elbow for protection. All of these deliberate,
it's like a one-leg Dirk
require
fadeaway,
incredible balance,
but instead of
and
using his leg, he
sturdiness.
uses his arm.
He sort of pushes the defender with the ball before going through him, which takes a Velcro grip. And this technique naturally led to the rip-through foul, where Duncan picked up a bunch of extra free throws anytime his opponent's arms were down or when they reached for an exposed ball and missed. Free throws were a big part of Duncan's scoring prowess. His 3-year peak in free throw attempts falls in the 98th percentile historically.
Wow.
And unlike Shaq, that served as an efficiency booster since Duncan shot 70% from the line.
Yeah.
So much of his scoring was about methodically inching closer to the rim. Occasionally he'd try that up and under, and sometimes he'd throw in this power spin move where he's squeezing the ball in a vise. You'll notice he was rarely off balance, so when he spins away from the double team, all his weight is over that right leg, which helps him finish through contact. When his avenues to the hoop were cut off, he liked a little turnaround over his left shoulder, and like so many great post scorers, he could also wheel into this same turnaround over his other shoulder, although, unlike many right-handed players, it was rarer to see him turn off this shoulder. There's a rip-through attempt again, and I wonder if he was more comfortable shooting these turning left because he could use that off arm to clear out a contesting hand.
I'm not an ambi-turner.
Of course, because it was a Tim Duncan move, he would jab step and fake his way into a little kiss off the glass every once in a while. Now, where have I seen that before? Duncan's bank shot wasn't actually a huge part of his game.
Yeah.
He called on it whenever he was facing the basket at an angle like this, but the banker was merely a component of his larger face-up attack, which involve little pull-ups on the baseline or in the middle of the floor even. Duncan wasn't actually a strong outside shooter, making about 38% of his shots beyond 15 feet during these seasons, which landed him in the bottom third of the league at the time.
I actually didn't know that.
I don't know how much more accurate he was going to the bank on these attempts. He was certainly comfortable jab stepping and then playing it off the window, but this was still a flat stroke with a hitch. Some of these were straight out of the Adrian Dantley school of rhythmic up-faking.
Adrian Dantley.
The
what was
shot
that?
was threatening enough to open up driving lanes where he could pump fake repeatedly until a defender reacted and then head downhill. There's that strength and body control to take contact from Shaq while decelerating. Despite his shooting struggles,
I think mainly
Duncan actually had some nice touch on these slow motion rumbles to the rim.
Is why he's such a good
but he was always under
shooter.
control and dexterous enough to flip in all kinds of little shots. His face-up game was aided by a tight handle that let him put his head down and go. He didn't have the change of direction to unlock a variety of dribble moves, but he was secure enough to barrel through players on drives like this. We saw a svelter Kevin Garnett struggle to hold that line last episode. All of Duncan's high percentage shot attempts and free throws made him a strong playoff scorer during these seasons, stacking up well against most big men historically, save for the best of the very best. Using these playoff numbers,
and that's an offense.
Far closer to
when he's not even as good
than to someone like Walton as a scoring hub. But there's a little more to the story. When Duncan faced stronger defenses, his scoring wasn't quite as potent, dropping off more than many of the modern greats. And he had similar struggles in the postseason. He just didn't play many elite defenses, in part because the Spurs were so good.
Yeah. And the Spurs were the elite defense, so you can't play against yourself.
By the way, like Hakeem, Duncan took up basketball later than most. He was a 13-year-old swimmer in the Virgin Islands when he started, and because of that late start, he said he didn't feel he was ready for the NBA after his junior year at Wake Forest, when he would have been the #1 pick in the draft. This lack of experience might have been a reason why he started with some fuzzy court vision, but he was always an eager student and willing passer, and in time he figured out what to look for as an offensive hub. He learned passing reads that allowed the Spurs to stream a ton of their offense through him. They could dump it to Timmy in the post and have him attack help by kicking it to a three-point shooter, or he could wait for the double and find a teammate cutting. This should look familiar. It's the same kind of inside-out offense that we saw with Olajuwon's Rockets and O'Neal's Lakers. On this one, he patiently allows the defense to commit near the baseline, so the basic kickout is open, and man, Ginobili made some big plays in 2003. This is the exact same set we just saw, only the help comes off the cutter to the corner, so Duncan fires it there nicely for a wide open look.
Ginobili off.
And his towering height helped him move through these progressions, with high quick releases when he spotted an open cutter. He even flashed another Walton move, the little jump pass in tight quarters, creating an even better angle for an express shipment. His best, most consistent passes were probably these structured reads from the post to cutters or shooters, and estimates of shot creation peg him slightly behind someone like Kevin Garnett. Velocity helped the big fundamental because he didn't really throw to openings before they emerged. That could have been a touch earlier, and sometimes that made a difference. A key to hitting tight windows is to anticipate movement, and here there's a lag and he's not ready to snap it over, and by then it's too late. When he could see a pass in front of him, he could drop some lovely dimes. Robinson's in his line of sight here, and those huge hands make the magic happen. Speaking of magic, he was a favorite of Duncan's growing up, and so Timmy always wanted to freestyle like a guard in transition, and there's a Johnson-inspired look away.
Wow.
He still had blind spots at his peak, openings in his periphery could go unnoticed.
In the 2000s as well.
Here's another one where the cut starts out of the corner of his eye, but he's kind of locked into his bank shot dance. Sometimes it felt like once he committed to a movement, there was no going back. He starts throwing this pass without adjusting for the defender, even though his teammate did, and I think Duncan had more of these glitchy-looking turnovers than most superstars. However, slow adjustments don't mean slow actions, and he could certainly map the floor in front of him when he had a second to process it, and then move the ball quickly. To my eye, he was most comfortable with quick reads out of set pieces, where he knew what to look for, like in a short roll situation with a teammate in the dunker spot. He had nice chemistry with Robinson in particular, especially on passes from the top. There was a kind of big-to-big simpatico with these lobs to the Admiral, and they even ran a little twin tower pick and roll with the court spaced. Unfortunately, those were very rare, but it wasn't rare for Duncan to hop along with his front court mate, synchronized swimming style. Finally, the big fundamental could snap off some brisk outlets, and he would even try to throw these over the top when the opportunity presented itself, which was a nice fit with smaller players who like to get out and run in transition. Much like Walton's Blazers, San Antonio's Duncan-centric attacks produced pretty good results, but they certainly weren't a team powered by offense, finishing about 2 points ahead of the league on that end from 2001 to 2003. Ironically, the 03 title team was one of the weakest Spurs teams of Duncan's prime. But a theme of this series is the difference between building an offense around a big man versus a team around a big man. Like Walton, Garnett, and Robinson, Duncan's two-way impact made him a superstar. And on those teams, his post-up game was a perfect fit for a defensively slanted roster that was supercharged by Duncan's paint protection. Because of this, he has some legendary plus-minus stats during these seasons, posting the second largest point differential on record when he was on the court compared to when he was off the court, trailing only his teammate David Robinson from the preceding 3 years. Well, Robinson and Duncan reinforce the incredible value of defensive studs who are offensive all-stars. It gives me some pause that the top two numbers came from the same team in back-to-back periods. There's plenty of noise in 50 games of plus-minus data, and Duncan's surrounding stretches do look drastically different. There were nagging injuries in those following years, but his scoring numbers remain the same. Part of the plus-minus drop-off was probably San Antonio growing less dependent on his offense as players like Parker and Ginobili emerged. The Spurs became a very good playoff offense in the mid-2000s, and while Duncan certainly wasn't a poor fit, his brand of slower, high-viscosity post-scoring doesn't scale.
Numbers in 03 are a lot bigger because that was like the 1 year that like Tim Duncan was the guy, like the only guy on the team that they were like really relying on. Because in 99 they had like David Robinson, and then by 05 and 07 Parker and Ginobili were good. So 03 was really the Tim Duncan carry job.
Up that well. Methodical isolation scoring can lift a team's offensive floor, but it's hard to be a great co-pilot with that approach. His lack of outside shooting limited some of his off-ball value. He could splash in jumpers off a pick and pop, but he just wasn't that efficient on these.
He
was a far better roll man, where he could catch and finish through contact near the rim, and he was mobile enough to take a dribble and adjust at the hoop. And this kind of off-ball game is a key to blending in on better and better offenses. He added more value with his offensive rebounding game, although they were often grabbing his own misses, which was also a byproduct of his power scoring, constantly trying to press forward toward the basket. This is kind of like a lighter version of what we saw from Shaq in episode 9. You can also see how crazy long Duncan is here, barely jumping to reach 10 feet.
Oh my god.
This overall combination of scoring, shot blocking, and plus-minus data gave peak Duncan some of the best impact metrics on record.
Third,
and
first,
they
and
might
first.
overstate his value, they also drive home how valuable his archetype can be, where Duncan's low-post scoring and playmaking can help weaker offenses reach respectable heights, while at the same time driving them to contention with huge impact on defense. And that same package can turn a solid team into a title favorite, which is exactly why Tim Duncan's two-way impact gave him one of history's greatest peaks. For more historical...
That was a really, really great video analyzing Tim Duncan's game. I like that he points out the good and bad. You know, just really giving us a nice perspective on the greatest peaks. And I definitely plan to do more of this series then for each player, because that was really good. So if you would definitely want to see more of that, please leave in the comment section below. Leave in the comment section below anything you want to see from Thinking Basketball or for anyone else. And yeah, bye.